The Barbarian Betrayal. Chapter 10. The man sat on the bench, tearing off bits of bread and scattering them to the waiting creatures hovering nearby. The Tetrarchy had no pigeons or squirrels, those being strictly relegated to the human worlds, but it did have analogues that filled similar ecological niches. The small animals jostled one another, chittering and squeaking for attention as he tore off more bread, gobbling up the bits of food before they hit the ground. So intent were the animals on their meal they barely glanced at the woman that sat down on the bench beside him. I wondered who they'd give the job to, the man said, tearing off another hunk. I suppose I should be grateful it's a friend. Tango raised an eyebrow. I'm not here to kill you, Whisper. He reached into his bag for another hunk of bread. Yes, you are, he told her. You just don't know it yet. She watched as he scattered more food to the tiny creatures. You're a hard man to find. You went to a great deal of trouble to disappear. Not great enough, apparently, he said. I had a couple advantages, Tango explained. And before you ask, Nasat didn't tell me. Whisper nodded. I didn't think he had. He wasn't exactly in his right mind when he contracted me for the hit. A snort sounded briefly in the back of his throat. But then neither was I. He tore off another piece of bread. Fujimoto sent you, didn't she? She did, Tango confirmed. I figured. He sighed and set aside the bag. I always knew she wasn't quite done with me. She does tend to plan ahead, she agreed. Tango turned and leaned against the backrest. I almost didn't recognize you. If I hadn't known what happened, I would have walked right past you and not stopped. She gazed at her former teammate, eyeing him curiously. What does it feel like? I doubt I could explain it to you, Whisper replied, not in a way that would make any sense. Try me, she insisted. The creatures at their feet squawked in protest, demanding the remaining food. He handed Tango the bag. Here, you might as well make yourself useful. She removed a hunk of bread and began shredding it. Our good field marshal knew all about that last job, as it turns out, he explained. She had her own reasons for wanting Chugaz Uidan dead. She made a ship available, provided me with funds through an untraceable account, passed on any intel she came across. All under the table, of course. Governments can't be seen employing assassins. Bad for the image. Whisper gave her an unreadable look, especially ones like me. And the Prime Minister? Tango asked. Was she in on it too? I don't know, he shrugged. I never dealt with her, only with Fujimoto. But if had to guess, I'd say she was at least aware. There was a certain tacit approval that I sensed. But if she did know, you can rest assured her hands are clean. She hasn't stayed in power this long by making those kind of mistakes. Fair enough, she nodded. But you haven't answered my question yet. I'm getting there, Whisper explained. Fujimoto wanted proof when the job was done, something that couldn't be faked. She also wanted Nasat to think it had all been his idea. Why? Tango asked. I think she was nursing a grudge, he said after a moment. The healers were regrowing her arm, and she was bitter about the loss of the ships under her command. Part of her blamed Nasat for that, I think. Whisper shrugged. Whatever the reason, she had her hooks set deep. When I got back from Konhim space with the proof she'd wanted, she set up a meet. My final payoff. Since when was money ever a motivation for you? She asked. Never, but it's nice to have, he said with a wan smile. True, she nodded. And the proof? Chugaz Uidan's head on ice, he said matter-of-factly. Hard to fake that, though I had a little fun with it first. I'll bet, Tango said dryly. You can spare me the details. Whisper nodded. Once she inspected the head, and she did it without flinching, which I thought was impressive. She handed me a credit chip and walked away. Apparently that was the signal. He shook his head in disgust. I didn't spot her team. Sloppy of me. They had me tranked and bundled up before I could lift a finger. Why did she bother? She asked. No offense, but if Helene was tying up loose ends, there are easier ways. It's like you said before, she plans ahead. I could still be useful, but running around without supervision was a potential problem for her. In my mental state at the time, anyway. So instead she had me fixed. Tango nodded. When she handed me the report... She paused for a moment and shrugged. I'd always assumed your condition was incurable. For us humans, it was, but the old triumvirate races knew a few tricks we didn't. He was silent for a moment, staring off into the distance. That's not to say the procedure wasn't invasive or painless. And now? She prompted. You mean now that I've had a conscience grafted onto my brain? He said bitterly. You know what I was like. You know what I did? Well, you know some of what I did, he corrected after a moment's thought. Imagine for a moment committing those acts without so much as a twinge of guilt, because guilt was a word without meaning for me. Consequences? Whisper barked out a brief laugh. Bring it on. None of it mattered to me, not the threat of prison or torture or even death. I simply didn't care. But now you do, Tango speculated. And now I do, Whisper agreed. And even worse, I remember. All of it. Every act, down to the last detail. Every sin I'm guilty of, and every last drop of blood. He turned and looked her in the eye. Imagine the sheer weight of that. Imagine for just a moment carrying that burden. Every single day. She let out a breath. I don't think I can, she admitted. He nodded. I appreciate your honesty. You were always honest, though, in the sense that you never tried to pretend you were something you weren't. It was a trait that we shared. We did, Tango agreed. Musashi and Greybird were skilled, no argument, but we were the killers. She considered that for a moment. So, why didn't you end it? Whisper sighed. Because I can't. They made sure of that, too. She nodded, taking that in. So, can you suit up again? Is it even in you anymore? Oh, yes, he said immediately. You see, they gave me a conscience, but couldn't quite manage to take away the drive. The urge. I may not be quite as devil-may-care as I once was, but I still have the skills. He paused and then said softly, and the need. Tango finished tearing up the last of the bread and tossed it to the animals, before standing up. There's ticket waiting for you at the port. Just make sure you don't go home. She shrugged without apology. We had a contingency plan in case this didn't work out. Whisper didn't seem surprised. Always a pleasure, working with professionals. Tango nodded. You know we're going to get bloody on this one, right? For the first time since she'd sat down, Whisper smiled. Oh, I hope so. The Barbarian Betrayal. Chapter 11. The projected 4 days to assemble the Konhim fleet had stretched to 5, and then 7, before Diaksh Guyaz finally pronounced it ready. Given how badly the task force had been mauled at Zhuge, he was taking no chances, pulling in every ship available to give them an even greater edge. But the time had finally come, and they could wait no longer. In truth, he was glad for this chance, to take to the ships once more and do battle. For 20 years he had led his people into a new future, carefully weaning them from the path of war. The 2 failed attempts to conquer the old triumvirate and new human foes had both ended in disaster for the Konhim, and once he had reclaimed the title of Diaksh from the late and unlamented Chugaz Uidan, he realized his people must change if they were to survive. It had not been an easy process, and it was still far from complete, but the Tetrarchy had kept their promise, helping to rebuild the worlds shattered during the war, and by doing so had given the Konhim pause. Seeing the races they had feared and hated for millennia give their all to aid and assist their people had caused many to reconsider their long-held beliefs, and Giaj had done everything in his power to encourage that. Though they still had far to go, he grew more confident with each passing day that this new path they had chosen was the correct one. His own deputy was proof of that. Chikij Kaujach had been a child when the last war had ended, and had grown up embracing the new realities. She was an intelligent and occasionally brilliant administrator, much better suited for the world he was trying to build, but not a warrior. Giaj had no doubt if she were forced to fight, she would acquit herself admirably, but her blood did not cry out for battle as his did. In his heart he knew his people would need her, and those like her, in the years to come. Should he fall, she would lead the transition to the next Diaksh, and he had done all that he could to ensure she would be named as his successor. But today, it was the old warriors like himself that were being called upon to save the Konhim race, as it had been in the past. There was comfort knowing that his kind was not yet obsolete. I wish I was going with you, Chikij said, as he prepared to board the ship he had chosen to carry his banner, Harbinger. "I am glad you are not," he told her. "The Konim will have need of you, and those like you, in the long years to come." She shook her head. "Your people still require their diaksh. I expect to see you return when your mission is complete, so I urge you to remember your duties and not do anything foolish." "Foolish?" He grinned fiercely at that. "What would give you that impression?" "Every tale told by your adoring legions to start," she snorted. "Bah! You cannot trust war stories told by old men deep in their cups," he chuckled. "Lies and exaggerations, all of them." "Ah, then it must have been another Jiaj Guyaz that personally led his warriors when they boarded Resolve during that final battle," she smirked. "Are you entirely certain it was not you that fought their way through the hangar bay, taunting death at every turn?" "Of course not," he grinned. "Whoever did such a thing must have been a far greater fool than I ever dreamed of being." "No doubt," she observed before placing a hand on his arm. "I am serious, Diaksh. Your people need you yet. Do not rob them of your leadership." "Leadership comes in many forms," he reminded her, "and sometimes it also requires sacrifice." He held up his hand before she could object. "I assure you, I am in no hurry to perform such an act. But until I return, I charge you with the safety and security of our people." Chikij Kaujak bowed deeply at his words. "I will endeavor to lead as you have trained me, Diaksh. The Konhim people will notice no difference in your absence." "No," he said sharply, catching her off guard. "You must make your own decisions, even if they differ from mine, for that is the mark of a true leader." "It shall be as you say," she murmured, as he clasped her shoulder. "I never doubted it," he smiled as he boarded his ship. "Perhaps I should have heeded her warning after all," Jiaj mused, as the fleet neared Gzuj. Long-range scans showed a planet far different than the one he remembered, with new orbital structures in place and a flurry of activity on the surface. Despite their repeated attempts, there was absolutely no communication from the system, either by the invaders or from fellow Konhim caught behind the lines. Either they were somehow jamming any attempts to make contact, or there are no Konhim left alive on the planet, his mind whispered, giving voice to the thoughts he had tried desperately to deny. Before he could chase down and throttle that errant notion, a chime pulled him from his reveries. He tapped the icon on his display, as Ajum Ganak appeared on the screen, calling him from Vanguard. "All is ready, Diaksh," he informed him. "We may begin our attack at your command." "I do not suppose I could convince you to exchange roles," he grinned, earning a scowl from his subordinate. "Chikij Kaujak would have me flayed alive were I to place you in that sort of danger," he shot back. "I therefore must decline." "How poorly you know my deputy," Jiaj chuckled. "She would never touch a blade if she chose to punish you. Though you may wish she had. No, I suspect she would do far worse, perhaps requiring you to personally complete all the necessary forms pursuant to an investigation into the particulars of my demise, in triplicate, followed by weeks of testimony before a panel. In a public forum, of course." His grin grew wider as Ajum shuddered. "I would rather have the flesh stripped from my bones and served to me as my last meal," he grumbled. "But since I have no intention of allowing you near the planet, we need not worry." Jiaj sighed. "I could order you, but then I would face my deputy's wrath." "Very well. Begin your attack, Ajum Ganak," he said at last, as his subordinate smiled. "Victory will soon be ours," he vowed, as he disappeared from the screen. The fleet assumed attack formation as it began its run, presenting a broad front to the enemy that allowed them to bring all their weapons to bear. With Ajum Ganak in direct control of the fleet during the attack, Jiaj found his role relegated to that of an observer, which chafed far worse than he had imagined. Still, at least Her was here, and not on another system light years away. Given that the enemy's forces were in orbit over Gzuj, had hoped to open far at long range. They were pinned with nowhere to go, which should have ceded him the advantage. Given the strength of their beam weapons, however, the only way they could defeat them was to overwhelm their defenses, and that meant getting in close. Assuming they were given the chance, of course. The Diaksh held his breath as the fleet entered medium range, and he could only wonder why the enemy had not yet opened fire. Certainly he had the range, so what was he waiting for? As they neared close range, Ajum Ganak could wait no longer. "All ships, fire!" he shouted, as the fleet exploded with a swarm of missiles thick enough to blot out the sun. Every ship had gone to rapid fire in order to give those terrible beams far more things to shoot at than they could manage. And as long as they concentrated on the missiles, they would not be firing at the ships. Thousands of missiles screamed towards the enemy forces, who immediately replied with those same beams, tearing great holes into their swarm. How can they possibly throw around that much energy? He wondered, as the Kohim fired a second wave, close on the heels of the first. For their part, the enemy did not seem to panic. Their beam weapons shredded the incoming missiles with deadly accuracy, just as they had before, when Ajum Ganak's image appeared on his display. "We are still too far out," he snarled as the fleet fired a third wave. "If we are to have any chance of swamping their defenses, we must get closer." The risks were great, and both knew it. But they had not come this far to simply turn tail and run, so with great reluctance Giaj nodded his assent. "Do what you must!" the Diaksh ordered as Ajum acknowledged the command. "Exuge will be ours once again," he vowed as he took the fleet in. The missiles began having an effect as they drew nearer to the planet. They still died by the thousands, but here and there enemy installations began to explode in balls of flame under the weight of fire they were throwing at them. Giaj held his breath as they pressed their attack home. Surely the enemy would fall now. In fact, as it turned out, the enemy had other plans. As the Kohim closed in, Xuj seemed to suddenly blaze with light, the enemy beams doubling in number and strength and then doubling again. Giaj stared in horror as the fleet was torn apart, screaming into the mic to pull out, to escape, to flee for their very lives. But far too few ships survived long enough under that withering fire to obey his frantic command. Vanguard with Ajum Ganak at the helm was not one of them.